Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us at the History of Art Subject Admissions webinar. My name is Catriona and I'm the School Liaison Officer at Downing College, and I've organised today's webinar. So why are we running this webinar? So we've putting on a series of subject admissions webinars to help students like yourselves to understand the admissions process and more about the course, from hearing from the admissions tutor, the director of studies and a current student, so you can decide whether the subject is right for you, and then how best to apply, and then hopefully some of you will come and join us in the future. So what's going to happen today is I'm going to hand over to our admissions tutor, Dr. Cameron Eunice, and he's going to talk over the admissions process. Then we're going to hand over to Dr. Frank Salmon, who is the Director of Studies for History of Art, who's going to give you a subject overview. And then finally, we're going to hand over to Hannah, who is a current History of Art student, and she's going to talk about her experiences at Cambridge. And then we will have a Q&A with all three speakers at the very end. So a couple of things to remember, we are recording the session and we will send you the link later on. We will try and answer as many questions as we possibly can in the Q&A, but can we encourage you to use the Q&A box instead of the chat box to help us keep track of the questions. So this should be at the bottom of your screen and you can post these at any time throughout the presentations. So a little bit about Downing then. So we're hosting today's webinar and you can see a picture of our site here in the centre of Cambridge. So we're one of 31 Cambridge colleges that make up the University of Cambridge. And we were founded in 1800 by Sir George Downing, and we have around 450 undergraduate students, and we take around 120 new students each year. And we take students for all subjects taught at the University of Cambridge, but importantly for today's webinar, that includes students who are studying History of Art. I'm now going to hand over to our admissions tutor, who's going to talk you through the admissions process.
Thank you very much, Catriona. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. So in today's talk, what I would like to do is cover some sort of broad information about the University of Cambridge. So in particular, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the roles of the department and a college. One of the things that I found quite unusual when I first came to Cambridge was what is the role of a college and how does that work in sort of synergy with what the departments offer. So I'll be telling you a little bit about that. I'll be touching on the admissions process, telling you where the key stages are and what are the key steps that you need to be aware of and deadlines that you need to be aware of. I'll also be talking a little bit about the admissions assessments, and then hopefully give you some advice and guidelines on personal statements, and broadly speaking about what to expect when you come for an interview at the University of Cambridge. So a little bit about the university. So when you join the university as a student, you are a member of the university and a particular department that you're studying at, as well as a member of the college that you've been admitted through. Now, in terms of what the roles of these two various institutes are, so in terms of what the department offers is that it sets course content. It's there to provide all the lectures, all the seminars, all the sort of assessment around the subject area. They're also there to award your degrees and classify your degrees, and also there to provide career advice. So generally speaking, your course is all taught within the department, or the content is covered at the department. When you go to the department to study, to learn about your subject area, you'll be meeting many other undergraduate students which are from other colleges as well. In terms of what the college offers, it's sort of something which is sort of complementary to what the department's doing. So the colleges primarily, one of the first things that they're involved in is the selection and admissions of students. So when you apply to the university, your application is reviewed by a particular college at Cambridge, and they are responsible for reviewing your application and making a decision about whether you should be made an offer for that subject to study at that college. As well as the admissions process, the college provides a range of support for students in terms of academic support and pastoral care as well. So when you join a college, one of the first things you will notice is that on the first day, the very first day when you arrive at college, you are assigned a director of studies. The director of studies is there really to make sure that you are keeping up with your academic work. So throughout your undergraduate degree, your Director of Studies will be there to keep an eye on you and act as a mentor, really, to make sure that they can advise you and make sure that you are on track with your academic work. As well as that, you'll be assigned a personal tutor at the college. And the personal tutor there really has a pastoral care capacity. So they're there to support you with any kind of concerns or issues you may have or problems that you may experience while studying your undergraduate degree. To give you an example, you may run into financial hardship while you're studying for your degree, which is unforeseen. A personal tutor is there to support you through that and be able to advise and guide you on a range of different bursaries and sort of hardship funds, which you can access to support you financially while studying at the university. Another example of a personal tutor's role is you may have a family bereavement or you may become unwell during your undergraduate studies, and you might need some support with that throughout the time while you're studying for your degree in terms of getting an examination allowance, extensions for deadlines for submission of assessed work. And again, that's really where your tutor comes into play, where they will be able to support you with that, liaise with the necessary people at the department to make sure the right kind of sort of resources and support are put in place for you. As well as a tutor, there's also a college nurse at every college, and they're there again in a capacity to provide support for students and also be able to provide medical advice to any students whilst they're studying at the university. And finally, there's always a chaplain at each college. And again, they're there in more of a pastoral capacity, and as well as a pastoral capacity there to provide general support for the student community within the college as well. Apart from academic and pastoral care support within the college is also responsible for providing all the accommodation for you. So all your undergraduate accommodation will be provided for you by your college. And in most cases, colleges provide guaranteed accommodation for the first 3 years. However, when you are preparing your application to the university, I would strongly advise you to look up accommodation facilities provided by colleges, because that can vary from college to college. As well as accommodation, you'll find that every college has their own dining facilities. So all the undergraduate students, which are resident at the college, have the opportunity to take up all the dining facilities within the college. As well as that, there's also a range of recreation facilities provided at the college. So a range of different types of sports activities. And again, depending on the college, that sort of facilities can vary from college to college. Now, apart from the accommodation services, the college also provides some small group teaching, and we call those supervisions. So what typically happens is, as a student, you'll be attending the departments to go for your lectures related to the courses you're studying. But when you come back to the college in the evenings and the afternoons, there may be some small group supervisions arranged where there's 1 or 2 other students with you within the group, where you will be sitting with an academic for an hour session, maybe 2-3 times a week, where they will be going through the lecture content in more detail and actually setting you problems, question sheets, essays, which are related to the courses you're studying. And the whole idea of these small group teaching sessions is to provide students an opportunity to be able to go over material that they're not too confident about, and the supervisors there is to make sure that all the students have a coherent understanding of the material that's been taught to them so far at the department. What you would also find in every college is a range of facilities to support your academic studies. So every college would have breakout spaces for students to have quiet places to go and study. Also have places like, for example, the library. Every college would have a library where students can have access to be able to get hold of books and resources that they need. Again, if you want to look up any specifics, there's a load of information available on all the college websites. So please do explore the college websites to learn more about what is available at those colleges. So hopefully this gives you an idea about the roles of a college and how they sort of work and complementary to what the departments provide for you whilst you're studying as an undergraduate. So now I'm going to go on and talk a little bit about the application process. There are a number of stages in the application process which we'd always advise students to think about when preparing their application. One of the first things is obviously choose your course at university. There's over 31 different courses on offer at the university which cover a broad range of subjects, up to 65 or more subjects across the university. So there's a huge variety of choice available there. And we always encourage students to find out a little bit more about the subject that they want to pursue at higher education, to really make sure that is the correct choice that they're making when they are applying to university. So for example, all of you here today joining this webinar is something which we'd encourage, which allows you to explore more about history of art as a subject at higher education. Now, once you've kind of made your decision about the subject you want to apply to, choosing a college is the next stage of your application process that you need to consider. Now, a lot of students have a range of different questions about how many candidates apply to a particular college for a particular subject, how many offers are made for a particular subject at a particular college. And all those things are useful information to find out. However, I would definitely not encourage, well, I would definitely encourage you to have your own criteria for selecting a college, which isn't based around these sorts of statistics. It's really important to think about what college you're going to go to, because at the end of the day, you're going to be spending 3 years studying there as an undergraduate, and you need to make sure it's the right fit for you. So have your own criteria for choosing a college. It could be the location of the college. It could be the sports facilities the college offers. It could be how close it is to the city centre. It could be the size of the college. You might want to go to a college which is a fairly large size college, or you may prefer going to a college which has got a smaller community. It could be based around the accommodation which is provided at the college. So do your homework, do your research, and pick a college based around what it has to offer and how that fits in with what you are looking for when you want to come and study at a college. Now, once you've kind of made your decision about which college you want to apply to, the next thing you really need to be aware about is any kind of deadlines for your application and assessments. Now, for history of art, there is no pre-interview assessment, but there is an at-interview assessment, which you would have to sit when you come for your interview to the university. Now, with regards to the application deadline, this is the 15th of October. Please do make sure you get your application prepared and submitted before this deadline. All other universities have application deadlines later on in January. However, Cambridge and Oxford have a deadline of the 15th of October. So please be aware about this and make sure you prepare your application in advance to this deadline. As well as this, once you've submitted your application, you will be hearing from the university with regards to an additional questionnaire. Now, a lot of students get quite stressed about this. They think this is part of an assessment of their application. I'd like to just reassure everyone the whole purpose of that questionnaire is so we can collect further information about you. For example, the sorts of things we would ask you in this additional questionnaire is what subjects, what topics you've covered in your A-level subjects so far at school. And that then gets listed on your application form. And what that does is allows any interviewer to have some background information about what you've learned so far at school. And then they can actually use that to base any questions that they want to ask in an interview. So again, please don't stress about this, but if you are unsure about anything which is being asked about in the additional questionnaire, just get in touch with the college you're thinking of applying to, and they'll be able to help and advise you about that. Furthermore, for many subjects, we do require a submitted work to be sent in. And again, if you are applying to a college which requires some submitted work for the subject you're applying to, they will get in touch with you with regards to the process of submitting that work and the deadline for submitting that work to them. Now, the submitted written work is typically any kind of essay that you have done so far at school or college, which has been marked by a teacher. So it's any kind of work that's been assessed and marked at school that you would like to put forward as part of your supporting paperwork for your application. And as I mentioned, as well as any submitted written work, there is an at-interview assessment, which takes place for history of an art, and hopefully later on in the webinar, we'll be able to tell you a little bit more about that. Now, once we've received your application and reviewed all the information you sent through to us, we'll then be making a short list of candidates who we will be inviting for interviews. And normally you would hear from the college by the end of November about whether you've been shortlisted for an interview. And the interviews normally take place in early December. And once we've interviewed all the candidates, we will be releasing all our decisions about any applications by the middle of January at the latest. So hopefully that gives you an overview of the various stages involved in preparing your application to the university. I just wanted to touch on to what sort of information do we use when we assess your application. Now, I can't emphasize enough, there's a number of things we look at when we are reviewing your application. We will be looking at your academic track record. How have you done so far academically in your assessed work? We'll be also looking at your personal statement. We'll be looking at any references that have been submitted from your school. We'll also be looking at any written work that you submit as part of your application. And as well as that, we'll be looking at how well you've done in your interviews. One other thing I have forgot to mention is with the additional questionnaire, there's an opportunity to talk about any extenuating circumstances. And this is really an opportunity for you to tell us about any kind of circumstances which have had an adverse effect on your academic work so far. So if there's been a family bereavement, or if there's been any medical conditions which has had an impact on your studies, we want to know about that. And there is an opportunity for you to tell us about that in that additional questionnaire. And as part of your application, we will be considering that as well. Now, no one bit of these information that we're looking at takes precedence over the other. All of this information is looked at collectively, and we make a decision about an application based on all this information taken into consideration. So to give you some examples, we may have an applicant who has applied to us, who has done very well, outstandingly, done outstandingly well in their interview assessment, but then maybe had a bad moment in one of their interviews. That doesn't mean that they won't be considered for an offer, because they would be looking at how you've done in your test and taking that into consideration, and maybe realizing that maybe at the interview you may have had a bad moment, and maybe that should not be used to kind of write off your application. So just to kind of emphasize, we look at all this information, not one particular bit of information to make our decision. So what are we looking for? I can't emphasize this enough. We are really only interested in academic ability and potential. So it's really to see how suitable are you for the subject that you've applied for, and are you going to be able to keep up with the academic workload that Cambridge demands of their students. So we're looking at whether you meet our entry requirements, whether you have a genuine subject interest, and how suitable are you for the course, and will you be able to keep up with the content in the course. If you are doing any kind of extracurricular activities, like playing for the under-18 football team, England football squad, that's brilliant, but again, has no relevance to the application process, and we won't be taking that into considerations. And a lot of students ask about whether their school or their background has an impact on their application. And I cannot emphasize enough that this has no relevance to your application. We are only going to be assessing you on academic ability and potential. And that's what's the criteria used to draw up our shortlist and to make decisions about offers that we make. So in terms of a standard conditional offer, for generally speaking, for any arts and humanities subjects, the standard offer is an A* and 2 A's. And at Downing, we also require an A* and 2 A's for history and art. If you are studying IB, then we would expect you to achieve an overall score between 41 and 43 with a 776 in your high level subjects. If you are doing any other qualifications, you can find all that information on the university website. However, if you're unsure about anything, please do get in touch with the college, and we will be able to advise you about your qualifications and whether they meet the entry requirements. Now, one other thing I would emphasize, that every college has their own entry requirements for their subjects. So before preparing your application and submitting it to a particular college, please do take some time to look at the entry requirements for that college to make sure that you have the right A levels to meet their entry requirements. At Downing, we don't have any specific subject, but we do encourage students to do essay-based subjects such as English and history as part of their A levels. Now, moving on, talk a little bit about personal statements. This is a very important part of your application. You usually would spend, write something which would be around 500 to 600 words long. It's really a chance to tell us a little about yourself. It is an opportunity for you to be able to kind of present yourself on an individual basis. So do spend some time thinking about your personal statement and spend some time writing your personal statement. and do share it with your school, with your family and friends, and get feedback from them about what you've written. The key things we want to look for when we're reading through a personal statement is to really see, whether there is evidence of academic ability and potential there, and are there any clear sort of statements there which show your motivation and the reasons why you've chosen the subject that you want to apply to and why you are interested in that subject at higher education. Now, talking about personal statements, one other thing that you would probably want to think about is that you may be applying to other universities which don't offer history of art as a subject of choice. So your personal statement needs to be generic, which could be applicable to all the other universities you're applying to. Now, in that case, many candidates want to prepare a personal statement, which is a generic one, which can be applicable to all their applications to other universities, but want to also submit a separate personal statement, which is specific for their application to Cambridge. Again, there is an opportunity for you to do that in the additional questionnaire and submit a specific personal statement if you have one for your application to Cambridge. Now, in preparing your personal statement, one of the key things we always recommend is supercurricular activities, is to really read around your subject area and to build up a broader context around the subject area and a broader understanding of the subject area and the context that it's applied to in applications. So we would definitely encourage you to read around your subject area and make sure that you have a clear understanding of why you want to pursue this at higher education. Now, there's a number of resources available online. These are just some examples for some subjects. Please do look on the university website, which also signposts towards a number of resources which are useful to read around and look at. Now, just to kind of summarize, a successful personal statement is one that gives specific evidence and examples. So really, when I say that, what I'm trying to say here is many applicants, when they prepare their applications, list off a number of different types of literature that they've read around their subject area, which is really nice to see that students have read around their subject area, but it doesn't give us an insight about you as an individual. So what I would always recommend is to pick one or two examples and talk about them in more detail and talk about what have you learned from that experience and how that has led to you choosing to study the subject that you want to study at higher education. It really needs to be very, very specific and talk about one or two examples. And then that gives us an insight into what was your thought process and how that's led to your decision to pursue your subject at higher education. Now, moving on, talk a little bit about interview process. Like I mentioned, this takes place in early December. You'll hear from the college, and in most cases, the college will be telling you who your interviewers are as well. The interviews are normally about 20 to 30 minutes long and will be predominantly based around academic discussion. Interviewers won't be asking you or spending much time asking you why you particularly want to study your subject at university, but we'll be going into more specific discussion around an academic topic. Now, that may be something that you've written in your personal statement. They may pick up something from there and talk about a piece of literature that you've mentioned and have a more detailed discussion. They may pick up your submitted written work and pick out some aspects of the essays that you submitted to have a more detailed discussion about that. Or they may actually present you with a series of information, content, images, literature, and ask you to comment on that and have a discussion around that. So my advice to anyone preparing for an interview is to really, really think out loud, and make sure that the interviewer can see what your thought process is. And during the interview, don't hesitate to ask any questions if you're not too sure about the problem that's been presented to you or the question that's been posed to you. If you're not sure about it, ask for clarification. Now, like I mentioned, this is what to expect at the interview. The other thing I would always encourage students to do is to go onto the university YouTube channel. There are a number of resources there available on the YouTube channels which provide good examples of what actually happens in the interview. And they're very useful resources, so I definitely encourage you to look at those as well. Finally, just to finish off, there's a number of students have quite a few questions. I'm hopefully will be able to answer them, but just to answer some frequently asked questions. With regards to gap years, that's not a problem, especially if it's subject related. If you are applying for deferred entry, that's absolutely fine, but we encourage students to kind of stipulate that on their application. As well as that, lastly, extenuating circumstances, please do get in touch with the college if there are any extenuating circumstances which has disrupted your studies. We do want to know about that and make sure that's taken into consideration when reviewing your application. So I'm going to hand over to Frank now, and hopefully near the end of the session we can pick up some questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So welcome everybody. My name is Frank Salmon. I'm the Director of Studies for History of Art at Downing College, the college actually I happen to have studied at myself, though many years ago. And what I'm going to do for the next 20 minutes or so before I hand you on to one of our current students, Hannah, second year, who's going to talk to you about her experiences, is to talk to you fundamentally about three different things. I'm going to talk to you about the overview of the course structure in Cambridge in History of Art, the TRIPOS as it's called in History of Art. I'm going to talk to you about what we think is particular about the Cambridge system and our course, and I'm going to talk to you, just following on from what Cam has been saying there, about what we're looking for in applications. Briefly at the end, if I've got a moment, I might just show you a pie chart about career destinations, or at least the things that people have gone on to do when they've graduated from us. So here we are, the course itself. What do we cover in the History of Art degree at Cambridge, which is a 3-year full BA degree? We're looking at the history of art, architecture, manuscripts, sculpture, of course, film, installation art, and so forth. Broadly speaking, from the Middle Ages right up to the start of the 21st century. So it's that kind of chronological sweep, though we do have some backwards glancing, if you like, or some background lectures and coursework on classical antiquity, the worlds of Greece and Rome. And increasingly, we are running courses and lectures inside courses that focus on art of the non-Western tradition. The History of Art course does not presuppose any prior knowledge of art and its history. So year one, what's called the part one of the TRIPOS. And the TRIPOS is the name, by the way, of all the subjects that are studied in Cambridge. It's a word that goes back to the way the subject was examined in the Middle Ages onwards, one of those little historical anomalies of Cambridge. The course, let's call it that, in the first year is an introductory course that seeks to, in a chronological way, cover basic ground from, as I say, the Middle Ages with a backward glance to antiquity through to the 21st century. And there's a particular focus on works of art that are actually in Cambridge itself. Here we are sitting in a city that has so much art and architecture surrounding us, that it would be wrong, I think, just to sit in the lecture theatre the whole time looking at digital images. So we do tend to focus quite a lot on things you can actually see in the flesh in Cambridge and in its great collections. But we also focus not just on how these things look, but on how art is made. And that's what the image on the top right is showing you. This is not a practical art course, it's not a fine art course, but we do think it's important for students to understand something of the practicalities of making works of art. And here are some students looking by looks of things at how you produce pigments to make, I should think, oil paint in this case, but you know how to make a tempera and so forth. It's just an hour or so's course. But we do have a whole course on the making of art in first year, which includes things, for example, like the difference between carved sculpture and cast sculpture or welded sculpture. Because we believe that the way a work of art is made is an inevitable part of how it looks, and therefore, by extension, of what it might be taken to mean. So the year one, part one, is completed at the end of that first year, and then you move into what's called a 2-year part 2A and part 2B, the second year and the third year. And in part 2, you get a chance to specialize via a choice of special subjects. These are particular courses offered by the lecturers and some of our associates in their areas of academic expertise. So you're getting world-leading experts teaching about the things they most know about. And alongside that, you do a core course in each of the second year and the third year. In part 2A, the second year, the course is called Approaches to Works of Art with regard to works of criticism. Basically, Hannah can tell you a bit more about this later on, but she's just doing the course at the moment. But basically, this is a course that gives you some indication, it can't be comprehensive, of course, but some indication of how, since really Plato in the ancient world, how art has been conceptualized as a phenomenon, the relationship between art as a mechanical art, or mechanical production, and as a liberal art, right down to how art is written about today in terms of feminism and post-colonialism and so forth. And in the third year, the core course, part 2B course, is called The Display of Art, and that is a course that considers how art has been and is today put on display in museums and in public spaces. It considers how we experience works of art, how they are presented to the public, how they are received. And indeed also there's some work in that course on how works of art and architecture are conserved and preserved. So that is the basic structure of the tripos, from part 1 in the first year to part 2 in the second year and third year. The special subjects I'm going to very quickly run through, just give you a flavour of what we're doing at the moment. No, before I do that, I'm just going to tell you what a timetable looks like in the first year, sorry. As Cam has made reference to general timetables in university, but what's the history of art timetable look like in first year? And the answer is that you will have lectures and what we call objects classes, where you are going out in Cambridge to the museums or to look at sculpture in the colleges or in some of the art collections in the colleges, or indeed making trips to Ely Cathedral, not very far away. These are in situ classes taught by one of us or one of our associates with you, usually divided into two groups, sort of 14, 15 students in each, so that we can actually have a discussion around a work of art. With 30, or 25 or so, it's a bit more difficult to do that. So these lectures and classes will last for about 5 hours a week. Then you'll also have a 1-hour seminar, which is a text-based seminar where you're looking at a piece of critical literature and discussing it with one of us. You may want to attend visiting lectures that we are running, and it's worth mentioning that in addition to the 7 university professors that we have, or university teaching officers that we have, as they're called, we also have every year a Slade Professor of Fine Art, who is an expert from another university, often another country, who offers a different type of art history for us to enjoy and benefit from what we're teaching on our regular basis. You will write in the first year 1 essay per week around a given topic or choice of topics, and you will follow that up with 1 supervision a week. So Cameron referred to the supervisions. It's a 1-hour meeting, usually with 3 first-year students and one of us, and the purpose of that supervision, as Cam said, is to go over again things you may not have grasped in lectures during the week, but also more particularly to read the essays or to come back on the essays that you have written and discuss them in more detail and explore directions you perhaps could have taken, or bibliography you didn't look at or chose to overlook, and the relevance of that. And the supervision is a 3-way thing, ideally, where certainly somebody like myself is doing some of the teaching, but where you are doing some of the talking, and where you're also talking to the other students who are present. And for me, one of the best kinds of supervisions is where I sort of light the fuse, as it were, and can sit back and watch the students argue it out as 2 or 3 brilliant young people talking their ideas out together. And then the first year is examined at the end of it by 5 3-hour papers. Now I'm talking here, of course, about the normal situation. In the COVID situation, things have been different, but naturally we're all hoping that by the time that people like yourselves in year 12 are arriving in universities, many of these problems will be behind us and we may be back to some of these systems. But equally, of course, there may be change based on good practice that we've discovered from what we've been forced to do during the pandemic. But at the moment, first year will be examined by 5 3-hour papers at the end of the year, and also a short dissertation. That's a 5,000-word essay. And for that, we require you to work on a work of art that is in or near Cambridge, not because we want to restrict you intellectually, but because we want you to really get to know your work intimately, to go back and look again, and go and read and write and think and talk, and then go back and look again and so forth. And you can't do that if you're working on something in the National Gallery in Canberra, Australia, or in South America. In third year, by the way, you have completely free choice about the dissertation that you write. So I said the special subjects I would briefly mention. I'm not going to go into detail about the images, but just to give you a flavor, and I haven't put these in any particular order, but these are the courses that are currently being offered by the permanent professors or university teaching officers of the university. English Renaissance, Art and Architecture, so that's a 16th and early 17th century course involving studies of architecture and miniature painting and costume design and mask and painting, as you can see with the image of Elizabeth I on the right there. Papers 13, 14, and I should say these papers all have two numbers because they comprise both an essay question paper, 3-hour paper, and also a visual analysis paper where you might be given images like the ones you see on the screen now. No questions, but images put together in combination, and you're asked to use your expertise that you've acquired during the year to write your commentary, your response to those visual analysis papers. So this is the Poetics and Politics of Surrealism. 15, 16, papers 15, 16 are Painting and Patronage in Imperial Russia. Some people often ask, do I have to speak Russian in order to take this paper? Well, no is the answer. My colleague, Professor Blakesley, doesn't require that. It's a bit of an advantage, of course, if you can, but she herself is the author of the most recent major monograph on painting in Russia in just this period, and I can assure you she wrote it in English. Going back in time a little bit, my colleague Dr. Cooper teaches Italian art and architecture in the age of Giotto. So you see some of the images of things that you would be considering in that course with fresco painting and little sculptures and tempera paintings here. Papers 17, 18 are Vision and Representation in Contemporary Art. This is Dr. Amy Tobin, colleague who has a part-time teaching job with us and a part-time job at Kettles Yard, which I shall mention in a moment or two's time. Papers 19, 20 is British Architecture in the Age of Enlightenment, Industry and Reform. That's my own paper, in fact, and that's considering works of architecture from the middle of the 18th century through the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. This is Manchester down here on the bottom right, through to the big changes brought about by the Great Reform Bill in 1832. And then we bring in colleagues from other faculties occasionally to teach papers for us. We're increasingly doing that. And one I might just show you here that we're currently running from a colleague in the Asian and Middle Eastern Studies faculty is Imperial Art and Patronage in Early Modern China. And again, no speaking knowledge or reading knowledge of Chinese is necessary to take that paper. So moving on then, what is particular about the way that history of art is studied in Cambridge? Well, I'm bound to start by saying that I think our teaching provision is one of our great recommendations, our lectures, our seminars, and of course, especially the supervisions, which are a rather unique thing to the Cambridge context. In many universities, of course, your teaching will be in much larger lecture groups or seminar groups, but drilling down to just 2s on 1s or 3s on 1s, or for your dissertation, 1-on-1 is really a very special opportunity for study on a personal level, I think, for students here. We have academic staff who, as I've already indicated, are amongst the most well-known and authoritative internationally on their subjects. We're also supplemented. You may think that 7 university teaching officers sounds very small. It is small, but we have the great advantage that we are supplemented by quite a large number of very outstanding postdoctoral researchers and indeed PhD students who do some of the supervision teaching and some of the lecturing as well. Some of the brightest young minds of their generations, but several years ahead of where you would be. And then, as I've sort of already hinted, we've got world-renowned collections of art and, of course, great buildings right on your doorstep here in Cambridge within a very small geographical circumference. And in addition to the museums, which I'll mention in a moment, we also have Hamilton Carr Institute for Art Conservation, which is where you can study some of the aspects of the making of art course that I mentioned earlier on. The visiting scholars I mentioned earlier on, including the Slade Professor, are often world-leading, outstanding academics or practitioners. We have outstanding library resources. Cam's mentioned the college libraries. All colleges have a library, and all colleges that teach history of art have history of art holdings. There's also the faculty library. That's the department library, effectively, which you can see on the top right here. And beyond that, there's the university library, which is a copyright library and therefore must be offered a copy of any book published in Britain, United Kingdom, in fact, I think, legally. So it's an enormous resource for us. And also, if you want to develop your language skills, which may well be necessary if you're doing Russian art or Chinese art, or if you're doing medieval art and need to improve the Latin you may well not have from school, the university is well kitted up with language resources, and sometimes colleges can provide some financial assistance to help with that. So I mentioned the great collections that we have. The Fitzwilliam Museum, which you see here on the screen, one or two of the objects that you can see on display in the Fitzwilliam would, I think, by universal consensus be regarded as one of the very greatest university museums in the world. Indeed, one of the best museums in the world, full stop, but certainly in a university setting. Kettles Yard is less well known, but no less precious to us, actually, and very popular with our students. This is a collection that was made by a man called Jim Eade, who used to be a curator at Tate, the Tate Gallery, and bought a house in Cambridge called Kettles Yard. You see it on the top right here, and had it extended with an exhibition space. And he lived there until his, well, in fact, until the 1970s. He died a little bit later. He lived there until the 1970s when he bequeathed the house and all its collections to the university, and that's a great teaching resource for us. And as I said earlier on, with Dr. Tobin and Dr. Powell as well, we have two members of the staff who are curators at Kettles Yard, but also teach in our department. This incidentally is Brancusi's Prometheus here. It stands on top of the big black grand piano. You can see it just there in the bottom left image. And then today we're talking about Downing College, and one of the great innovations of Downing in recent years has been the creation of the Hyung Gallery, a relatively small but very precious exhibition space just inside the front gates of the college. And I show you on the left here the 4 installation sculptures that were put into Downing by Ai Weiwei 2 or 3 years ago. I should think he also had an installation inside the court of the college in front of the chapel. And then on the bottom, on the right-hand side, they're not bottom right, sorry, that's one of the corridors at Murray Edwards College, which houses the Neil Hall Art Collection, a very impressive and important collection of paintings and works of art entirely by female artists. So to come back to what Cam was talking about, and in some ways just to double down on that, what are we looking for in an applicant for History of Art here at Cambridge? Well, as Cam has already said, we're looking for a strong academic record. And we would expect, in a standard A-level offer, being A-star, AA, for the A-star or its equivalent, if you're doing a different examination system, to come in an essay-based or academic subject. That's because our subject is an academic and an essay-based one as well as a visual one. And we need to know that from your exams in year 13, you will be capable of not just succeeding, but thriving in the way that we teach our humanities subject here in Cambridge. But we're also looking for this, good visual acumen, good visual intelligence. Now, what I mean by that is that you actually have the ability to use your eyes to process the information you are receiving and to remember things you've seen and put visual images together. Not just to know about art as it were in a kind of theoretical way, but to actually appreciate it for its visual constituents. In a sense, this is the fundamental difference between, let's say, history that uses works of art to illustrate its arguments, and art history that starts with the work of art and then uses the history to try to explain what it's looking at. So you could be the best English literature student or history student or languages student, but actually have very little visual acumen at all. That's not a criticism. It's just a fact that not everybody has every skill that's available, and we are looking for that. And that's why so much of our assessment is visually based in the examination, in the at-interview admissions assessment, and indeed almost half of your art history interview could well be looking at works of art with us and discussing it rather than discussing things on paper. We're looking for, as Cam has already said, an inspiring personal statement. I put "and true" in brackets there because, it is very tempting when you're writing kind of a sort of an account of yourself and you're pitching for a position at university or for a job or something later on. It is very tempting to dress things up a bit, and that's always a bit risky in my experience, because you've got to bear in mind that in the interview, I or one of my colleagues could pick anything you said in your statement and ask you about it in considerable detail. And if it turns out it wasn't something that you were really committed to, or you really knew about, had you really read that book, for example, had you really visited that gallery, that's going to show in the interview and obviously not be a particularly good sign. There's no need to spin out what you are interested in and what you're inspired by. It doesn't matter what it is, but just lay it out for us in a way that represents you, the person. I should say, by the way, that very often I've interviewed students who've said things in their personal statements, and when I asked them about them, it's turned out they've changed their minds. Well, that's fine. We all change our minds all the time about things. I'm not worried about that. I'd expect a 17 or 18 or 19-year-old to change their mind about things. But I do want to know, if you put it in your personal statement, and you know you have with UCAS, I would want to know what it is that made you change your mind, and why you no longer think Titian is a very interesting painter, or why you've decided that Damien Hirst is probably the most important artist of the last 400 years, or whatever it may be. As long as you can argue your case, that's going to be fine. But do know what your case is, or what it was when you wrote your statement. We're looking for evidence of initiative in pursuing the subject. Now, maybe Hannah will talk a bit more about this later on, but there are all sorts of things that any of you, wherever you are here now talking to me in the UK or elsewhere indeed, there are always things you can do to pursue your interest in the subject of history of art. There may be a local museum in your town, or you may be on occasion to travel to the nearest city to see works of art when you're on holiday. Are you looking out for museums or galleries or buildings or sculptural installations? What do you do to pursue your interest in the subject? And indeed, if you can't do any of that, how do you use the internet to do it? And I should just say, a few years ago, I had a student at Downing who came to interview and had largely learned about art from a quite remote part of the country by studying the art auctions, the art commercial transactions that were going on. And the student had gone beyond, of course, the market value of things to ask questions about, well, why did that sell for that much? And why did that, which he thought was very good, not? And in pursuing that through the internet, he was able to really clue himself up in an extraordinary way. And that was the student who we, in fact, took at the college and who went on to get a first, but who had very little first-hand experience of seeing works of art. He hadn't had that opportunity. We're looking for a supportive school reference, but I'm sure you're all going to get that anyway. And what are we not looking for? Well, absolutely not for the necessity of having done history of art at A-level. We know very well that history of art A-level is not taught in very many schools. As I say here, I was looking at this earlier today, preparing for talking to you, and of the 31 offers of admission we have made in December 2020, just passed, I see that only 13 of those 31 students had done or were doing history of art at school. So quite a bit fewer than half of those who received offers had any experience of doing art history at school. So we're not looking for loads of knowledge about the subject already. We're looking for what I said over here, evidence of pursuing initiative and good visual intelligence and acumen and a strong academic record. Nor are we looking for lots of work experience in the art world. I just mentioned to you a student who succeeded at Downing, who, for example, achieved what he did by looking at the art market, but didn't have the benefit of being able to go and work in Sotheby's or Christie's for a summer or anything like that. So that's not expected either. Nor are we looking for students from any particular background. We will take anybody and evaluate their application, looked at from all points of view, as Cam has said in the application. Very briefly then, as I close up and hand on to Hannah, what sort of skills would you get from doing an art history degree? Well, in addition to the kind of textual analysis skills you would get by doing, say, English or history or language, you will also, of course, gain additional visual skills. And I think in a future that you're going to be facing where so much information is conveyed visually, this is going to be a very important thing for success in professional and personal life, that one has good visual intelligence. You'll also understand, I think, how environments work, how places work, because our courses like the making of art and the display of art and many of the special subjects intimately connect the work of art itself, but with the circumstances for which it was produced. I mean, an altarpiece in the National Gallery in London now wasn't painted for any such context at all. It was painted for a church in perhaps the 15th century. A sculpture may have been prepared for a completely different setting from what it now has. Just look at what's going on the news today about the Anthony Gormley sculptures on the beach at Aldborough in Suffolk. So understanding environments from the point of view of works of art has a broader application than just from an art historical. You'll become extremely good at summarizing information because you'll read an awful lot, you'll learn an awful lot, you'll hear huge amounts of material in lectures, and you'll have to decide how to distill that to the things that really matter. And that's a great skill, a great transferable skill to carry on into professional life. Reading between the lines is important too. What do things mean? They don't have singular meanings, works of art. What's actually going on below the skin? What was the artist trying to convey? How did we receive it as an audience today? How might that differ from how the audience received it, or the patron received it back in the 15th century, or in Paris in the 1780s or something? You'll be very good at presenting to audiences. You'll gain confidence in not just summarizing your ideas and writing essays and reading between the lines, but actually making verbal presentations through the supervisions and through the way that we get you to present your dissertation ideas, for example, to the rest of the class. Not to test you, but purely to get you familiar with the way of explaining ideas. And that, of course, is another very transferable skill. You will, from time to time, be working in teams. So you'll understand that there's a considerable difference between what we do on our own and what we can achieve when we club together with other people. You will learn to articulate an argument because every week you'll be writing essays and you'll be having criticisms, critiques on that essay from somebody like myself. So those essays are purely what we call formative. There's no marks given to them. The marks come in the exam at the end of the year. But by the end of the year, you have learned how to do it by week in, week off, writing these essays and honing your arguments till you know precisely how to tackle a question and articulate a clear and well-balanced response. You'll be good at making evidence-based judgments, not hypothetical leaps of faith, but actually knowing when a document or another work of art or a work of art by another artist can be introduced to effectively compare and contrast and prove a point you're trying to make. You'll be certainly very good at working to deadlines because, as Hannah will tell you, they come very regularly in Cambridge, and history of art is no exception in that regard. And you'll, I think, also be good at using your imagination. So a few years ago, we did a piece of research, 2015, 16 and 17, over a 3-year period, looking at 82 of our graduate students or graduates from our department, both people who did the BA and also graduates, those who did the MPhil and the PhD. And this is what we found in terms of the number of destinations or type of destinations that people went on to. As you can see, getting on for a third went on to further study. And that isn't really surprising because BA in Cambridge often prepares people well for further study, a master's degree. And you're doing a master's degree, that very often leads on to a PhD, and a PhD often leads on to postdoctoral studies. So it's not surprising that in a university like Cambridge, nearly a third of our graduates would go on to further study. But you can also see that nearly a quarter in the yellow here have gone on to careers within the arts sector, museums, heritage sector, commercial art sector, and so forth. And then we got quite a slice here of marketing and communications. And that, I think, is a representation or reflection, I should say, of the very point I was just making, that history of art gives you this tremendous visual acumen as well as textual skills. So people like that work very well in the context of marketing, communication, media. There's a bit of IT there. Teaching's a fair bit of it there in green, and there's other over there. I suspect in other, actually, law would be a significant factor in there. Quite a few people gone to legal practice afterwards. And I've got a student who did the MPhil with me a couple of years ago who's just finishing qualifying as a barrister who will specialise in law connected with, in fact, art. And finally, if you want to have more information specifically about the history of art course at Cambridge, the two obvious places to go are to our YouTube little film. It's a 3-4 minute film. It was actually only put up there, this latest version, in May of 2020, because it's already had well over 6,000 views. So that's the place to go for a sort of a quick 4-minute snapshot on what we do and seeing some of our students talking and seeing some of the work going on in the field, as it were. Or you can go onto the university's admissions website and get the prospectus, which is here. You can have that sent to you if you're in the UK physically. or you can download it, I think, as a PDF, or I think you can read it online as well. So those are the source of information to go to. So I'm going to stop there. And I think we're going to pass on to Hannah now. And then at the end of Hannah's presentation, myself and Hannah and Katrina and Cam will be available to deal with some questions.
Hello everyone, I'm Hannah and I'm going to be giving you your presentation on student life. First I thought I'd start with a bit of an introduction to who I am. I'm a current second year History of Art student with Downing College specifically. I come from a state school background with 3 A-levels in history, art and English literature. And prior to Cambridge, I had no background with history of art at all, other than the interest that I'd kind of had in it through my art coursework, studying Rembrandt, and through art trips to galleries and just a regular interest. I'm a member of Downing Dramatic Society. I'm their publicity officer, which is where I get to kind of share my creative outlet by creating posters for the shows in Downing. I have a particular interest in the Dutch Golden Age, which I'm sure Frank has heard far too much about from me. And I personally aim to go into restoration. I just thought I'd talk a bit about perceptions versus reality of Cambridge. I think a lot of people have this idea of what Cambridge is before coming, and I think that hinders their decision to either apply or not apply. I personally, before coming, thought it was very uptight, fancy, really academically rigorous and extremely difficult to get into. And I'd almost completely convinced myself not to apply. It was actually my history teacher who implored me to and basically said, you don't have anything to lose by not and everything to gain. So I did, and here we are today. Obviously, I did get in. And that reality has been kind of different to what I'd expected it was going to be. It is very much my home away from home. It's different from my home life. I'm not going to lie. It is a different experience, but it's not as fancy as you assume it's going to be. You kind of have the option to make it as fancy as you wish it to be. Formals are completely optional, and I personally have worn my gown less than 10 times. So it's not as bad as you think it will be. It is challenging. I'm not going to lie. Essays and weekly things, it's what you'd imagine Cambridge would be in terms of academics, but it is worthwhile, and there is plenty of time to explore your own personal hobbies and interests and socialize with your friends. In terms of the application process, I know that a lot of people find it quite daunting. I know I did. But it was actually the application process itself that really solidified for me that I wanted to study the subject. I hadn't really had the chance to discuss art history with anyone before my actual interviews, which sounds really, really strange, but it was those discussions that kind of made it sure for me whether or not I got into Cambridge or not, history of art was the right decision. Downing College, my home, is a very friendly place. We're known for our community and close-knit feel. It's very open. In the previous images you've seen, we've got a massive green. So even though we're quite city centre, you do feel like you're in your own kind of world. It's not as imposing as some of the other colleges or tight. My personal favourite part about Downing is the architecture. We're neoclassical and very, very well known for our lovely columns. Some of the facilities that have already kind of been discussed in this talk, such as the Butterfield, it's our cafe, it's where I like to do a lot of my working. It's open to the public during the day as well, so it's not always just people working. It's a very, very nice atmosphere to be in. It then turns into a social space for just college students in the evening, which is very nice. The Hyung Gallery, as Frank mentioned, is a really good resource to have right on your doorstep. It's our own personal gallery, once again open to the public, but it holds lots of exhibitions. And as students, as art historians, it's a really good resource to have because you also have the opportunity to work there if you wish, to get gallery experience, which is unique to us. And then again, just as a member of Downing's Dramatic Society, I thought it might be good to mention the Howard Theatre, which is a great place to experience live theatre right on your doorstep without having to really go anywhere. just generally, it's super, super close to the faculty. So if you're one of those people that like rolling out of bed quite late, it's a 5-minute walk from the door. So it's really convenient for lectures and for access to the library as well. The faculty library is one of my personal favorites. It feels very much like a cozy bookshop, which is perfect for me. And yeah, it also has all art history books. It's only art history, which is very, very handy and great for essay writing. So I'm just going to talk a bit about why I personally chose History of Art at Cambridge. The course structure, as Frank's mentioned, is great, and it worked really well for me, having never studied the subject before. Year 1 works chronologically from the earliest examples of art up until present day, which I found perfect because I had particular areas of interest which I'd like looked into on my own, but for the areas that I hadn't, it gave me that basic understanding of all of those areas and helped me develop the kind of technical skills that I hadn't had from not studying it before, which was great, perfect for me. Year 2, I have really enjoyed. The special subjects I chose were Tudor visual culture and Jerusalem culture and crusade, and they have just been amazing. I can't give their praise enough. And the approaches course, again, is a really interesting aspect that I didn't even think to consider when applying for an art history degree. It deals with the approach to art history from the beginning up until now, and it goes over all the main arguments and discussions that occur in that discourse. Object classes are really good. You get to deal with these pieces of art hands-on in the prints room as well at Fitzwilliam Museum, which is a really, really unique experience to get to see these prints outside of their gallery space, up close and personal with people that know them like the back of their hands. On-site lectures like the ones we have in the Fitzwilliam and in museums such as the classics faculty, which is pictured here, are really, really good and a nice breather from being in the lecture theatre and or working independently. Trips are great, and my personal favourite is to the Hamilton Care, which Frank has also mentioned already. As someone who wants to go into restoration, getting to see the behind the scenes and how they do that was incredible and something you don't really get the opportunity to do most other places. Resources, again, libraries, DOSes, supervisors, you really can't fault them. And another thing that most people don't really consider is the cohort size. So there are only 26 students in my year group and around 80 across all 3. So it means I'm not lost in a crowd of 200 to 500 students in a normal lecture space. And it also means that I know everyone on my course. We're all quite good friends and we go for meals and discuss our work together. And it's just a nice feel and atmosphere to be in. What's it like to study at Cambridge? The big question. Lectures are between an hour and 2 hours. The 2-hour ones tend to be 2 lectures that happen back to back. And this is kind of your opportunity to take a back seat and just listen to someone discuss a topic they know really, really well. You don't have to be too hands-on. You can take your notes and just sit and listen. And it's really good, but you do also have the opportunity at the end to ask any questions you might have about the topic. Lecturers are really great at staying behind and letting you ask those questions that you might have got throughout the talk. Seminars are smaller. They happen in half of your group because we're a small year group. You can do it in just two sessions. But again, they're smaller group discussions. They're more interactive. You'll have to do a bit of reading beforehand for these in preparation, but you're there to answer questions and ask questions and just really have a more group discussion with it. And then supervisions take that a step further, and you'll typically be in pairs with one other person of your year group. And they are sessions based upon weekly essays. So you'll be expected to write in your first year an essay and hand it in for a deadline, typically the day before your supervision. And yeah, so discussions will be based upon those, or they'll be used as springboards for further discussion. And it's a great opportunity to develop your own kind of art historical voice and ask questions and make connections and be risky. It doesn't matter if you're wrong. It's the perfect opportunity to try to make these connections that you've been making in your mind and trial them out on someone who can give you an opinion on whether or not, or on what they think of it. Independent working, because we're a humanities student, it means we do have fewer contact hours than other subjects. And so it does mean that you do have to be a bit more proactive with your own reading and essay writing. But don't let that scare you. You work to how you do. So you spend as much time on it as you need to, and you can work around your own schedule. It means that you're not beholden to being in the department 5 hours a day. You'll only really have 2 hours at most a day in the department. And yeah, so it's perfectly suitable to you. Work-life balance is another thing that a lot of people worry about, because of Cambridge is known for being academically rigorous and spending all your time in the libraries. You do a lot of work, but there is still plenty of time to hang with your friends and explore things. We always make time to play Mario Kart every once in a while in my house. We typically went and played pool in the Downing Bar whenever that was open, and go do movies, eat, and experience Cambridge with your friends as well. There is plenty of time to do everything that you want to. Another aspect of college life that doesn't really get mentioned in any depth is college families. This is quite a weird tradition if you don't know about it. But you basically get assigned a college mum and a college dad. I have 2 college daughters. And this is a way of pairing you with second-year students to kind of answer any questions you might have before coming to Cambridge and upon arrival, and to help with that transition. And they're there to kind of offer any general help. I know I'm more than happy to give my college daughters books on art history or help them with their essays if they need them, or if they just want to talk, I'm more than happy to do all of that kind of thing. So that's really what we're there for. Family Day is a big thing in Freshers Week. It's a day where you spend with your college siblings and your parents, and we basically just take you around Cambridge, show you the sights, and yeah, introduce you to life in Cambridge. And yeah, so I've included a picture of punting because it's kind of one of the activities that we tend to do. And this year we took my college daughters out for tea as well, which was really nice. College marriages, this again seems like a really weird thing. You get college married to a fellow fresher in your first year. My college husband is one of my really good friends, and it's not legally binding. It's just formality, but it's a really fun way of doing things, I think. And the proposals always form a good part of college discussion and make really good memories. So yeah, don't be alarmed by that. Societies are another big part of college life, and university life in general. There's one for everyone, there's one for everything, and they're a great opportunity to try new things and get involved with something you may not have thought you wanted to try. If there isn't one that you want to join, you're always more than able to create your own. There's funding available for that. I don't personally know all the routes on how to do that, but if it's something you really want to do, there are people there to help you with that. Sports societies are another big thing. They're open to everyone, from every kind of ability level, from novices to experts. And rowing is a big thing. Don't get pulled into it if you don't want to, but it is a big thing at Cambridge. And you should give it a go if you want. A lot of my friends do it, and it is such a big part of their college life. It's just not personally for me. But like I said at the beginning, I am part of DDS, and Downing Freshers Play is another great opportunity in your first year to get involved, even if you don't really do drama. You don't have to have any background in it, and it's a great way to really get to know a different group of people within your year in college and to experience that. Yeah, so we had a really good time doing that. Things to do in Cambridge, there's endless. It's a great city, and there's always something on citywide and university-wide and typically college-wide as well. So don't worry, there is always something to do. Formals, again, entirely optional, but a great way to have a relatively cheap 3-course meal with your friends. We tend to use them as like birthday celebrations or things like that. It's a nice way of doing things. Ents are just entertainment evenings in college. They'll be organized by your JCR. And yeah, they're typically like themed events that will occur in spaces in college, and they're really good fun. The paddock is the green in the middle of Downing. They've recently just put a stage in for the COVID year, obviously, to be socially distanced and in the open air, but it's a great place generally to hold open air theatre, to have movie nights. We've hired in a big cinema screen before, which was really, really fun to do. So yeah, that's another thing that we have. The Butterfield, again, Downing specific, but most colleges have, all colleges have their own space and bar to do these things, but open mic and jazz nights, and it's not mentioned, but quiz nights as well. Such a fundamental part of my life at college. I love them. Keith's Cafe is held by our college chaplain. That's a Downing thing again, but it's an afternoon of free coffee, tea, hot chocolate, biscuits, and it's just where all years kind of congregate and take a moment out of their afternoon to just be and converse and enjoy being in Downing. And then just other things to mention, the Fitzwilliam Museum do a lot of student nights, and they're really fun. I've done life drawing and collage making and all different musical events and poetry in the Fitzwilliam. It's really, really good. Mabel's end of exam season, massive parties, really fun. And then, yeah, sightseeing and enjoying the city, as I said. And my personal favorite of not really mentioned traditions, but Bridgemas. It happens on the 25th of November. It's kind of a personal thing that you kind of sit with your household and you do a roast dinner. You don't have to, again, it's an optional thing, but it was really nice to just sit down with your friends and make food and sit and enjoy it. So yeah. So why Cambridge? The course, it has to suit you. For me, it really eased me into the subject, gave me the confidence to approach art, and gave me this new analytical mindset, and it just really took me beyond what I thought I knew of art history. I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to do it, having never studied art history before, but the making course for me, as someone who studied art history, was so good in my first year because it played on all my strengths. I knew art, I knew how to make art, and so that was a nice comfort, and I kind of developed the language that I needed in terms of meaning. So I always tended to root towards my strengths and write about the visual, which was what you kind of need to do initially, and then apply that meaning to it as well. Student life, as we've kind of gone through, there is so much available to you. It's not all work. It's a really good place to meet like-minded people, experience new things, and make amazing memories. All of my friends, I couldn't be without them now. They really are my people. And yeah, I was so used to being in a state school. I was the oddball. I was the one that liked studying, as cringy as that sounds. And you just have such a mix of people that it's kind of difficult. So to go somewhere where everyone is happy to have those sort of discussions with you really settled me. And I didn't think I'd fit in, but I did find my place here. And yeah, just to kind of reiterate, if you're still on the fence about applying, if you don't apply, you'll never know if you could have got in. So just kind of go for it. I know I would have regretted it if I hadn't, even though I wasn't convinced in the beginning. By the end of my interview, it was kind of solid in my mind that I secretly really wanted to come. So yeah, thank you very much.
So one question Frank, I would be quite interested in, I get asked a lot, is how do you prepare for your AT interview assessments? What sort of advice would you be giving to students in preparing for their AT interview assessments?
Yeah, okay, Cam, thank you very much. That's a good question, and one that we ought to perhaps ask Hannah about, because she was in that precise situation. But my immediate response would be to just say, to the benefit of the students who are listening in, that first of all, the AT interview assessment is one of our visual analysis assessments. So it's not an essay-based thing. So you are going to be confronted with a choice of 5 pairs of works of art, images of works of art, and you choose 2 of them over the course of an hour to to write about. So in a sense, the question, Cam, is how do you prepare to do that? and there are two answers, I think, that easy ones to give. One is that on our department website, there are some examples of, I think, a previous, or at least a hypothetical paper. So you can actually see the kind of things that come up, and what you can do is have a go and get a friend or a teacher to read it and say what they think. The other thing I think that I would suggest, apart from sort of practicing, as it were, is for you yourself as the candidate, when you're obviously interested in works of art, rather than just considering each work of art individually, to in your mind pair it up something else that may be similar. Let's say a altarpiece, one from the Middle Ages and one from the Renaissance, or a Picasso sculpture with a German linewood sculpture or something. All the things you're interested in, but just put them into pairs and see what ideas spark off, because that's what we do a lot of. Hannah can probably say more.
So yeah, the at-interview assessment was a big point of worry for me, having never studied the subject before and never written anything like it. I did go onto the website and print off a bunch of the images and kind of just sit for a bit and annotate around them to kind of think about the things that I'd write about. And then I took a few of them to my art teachers to kind of ask what they kind of would draw out of it, and then make links to the things that they were talking about and the things that I'd been thinking about. But again, I played to my personal strong suit, in the sense of making of art and the kind of methods behind that and the reasons and choices of colours that I'd been thinking about in my art course. So play to your strengths, I'd say, as well. If you're thinking of meanings and stuff and you have a basis in the historical background, definitely draw on that as well. But try to always ground it in what you're seeing. I think that's such a big part of it. You are drawing on the images and use that as the fundamental part of your discussion.
That's right. That's absolutely right, Hannah. But yeah, thanks very much. So Cam, there are 2 points just to make about that. One is that, with these visual analysis questions or propositions, there is no right answer.
Yeah.
Right? These images are not chosen because they cohere into a particular narrative that we're asking students to discover. They could be very disparate things. It could be a portrait of a mother and child, set beside a stone sculpture of a man, an old man or something. It's asking you to use your eyes to develop what I describe as that visual intelligence, that visual acumen that we're looking for. Because if you can't do that kind of thing, you're probably not going to make a great art historian. And one thing that surprises me about the visual analysis in the at-interview assessment, when we used to hold them like in an exam hall, we don't do that anymore. They're done in the colleges now. But it used to surprise me that although it's only a 1-hour assessment, students would open the envelope with the images in and start writing immediately before even really looking. And I would sit there thinking, well, I don't know what you're going to be saying, that you haven't actually sat and looked at this thing yet. So you're telling me what it is or what you think about it, but you haven't. So, even in a half-hour assessment, you need to spend 5 or so minutes looking at it and thinking about it and what ideas it inspires, and then in your mind putting them into some sort of logical order. So that's the first point. The second point, which is crucial, Cam, is just bear in mind, as you yourself said, the admissions assessment is only one part of the overall application, right? We know, because we pair up your names with your UCAS application, we know whether you've done history of art at school or not, and through your personal statement, how well kitted up you are. And so, a performance in visual analysis that was, not strong on the assessment, if you come from a background you haven't had a chance to do it before, is not going to outweigh many positives in other areas of the interview process.
Yeah.
But if you are doing history of art at school, you would be expected to deliver quite a strong visual analysis.
Mm. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you, that's really helpful. A couple of questions have come in while we've been speaking. So this one, I think we'll start with you, Cam, and then Frank might want to add in. So even if work experience is not looked at or required, is it worthwhile if it can relate to your studies? And they've given the example of their EPQ topic.
Yeah, I mean, having any kind of supercurricular activities that can help reinforce your understanding in your subject interests is a really good idea. An example of an EPQ is something which is a good one to bring up. There are definitely something I encourage students to do. If you have an opportunity to do an EPQ, do take it up at school. In the broader context, what I always encourage students is to think about what they're learning at school and how that applies into a broader context, into the subject area that they're interested in. And any kind of activities that allows you to make those connections are ones which I would encourage students to think about. So it's definitely a great thing to do, and I definitely encourage students to take up any kind of supercurricular activities when preparing their application. I don't know if anything else you'd like to add to that, Frank.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that, Cam. And when you said earlier on in the general talk about admissions that, you know, playing for the England under-18s football team, you know, I mean, you didn't mean to imply that people shouldn't do it. You were just saying they're not going to get an offer because of it.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, I'm sure all of you listening in here are brilliant young people who've got all sorts of other stuff you're doing, extracurricular stuff. I mean, I didn't know this, but it sounds to me like Hannah was a bit of an actor at school as well, maybe. I didn't know that. Maybe I did at the interview. I've forgotten, Hannah, sorry. But you know, all sorts of stuff. And EPQs are great opportunities, particularly for students who don't have a chance of doing something art-related in part of their A-levels. But I would just say this, that you know, you need to make sure that your balance between your academic work in year 13 and your extracurricular activities doesn't compromise your A-level results and the getting of the A star, because you know it would be very unfortunate if you spend a lot of time doing the extracurricular stuff thinking that was going to count. If you don't get the A star, you know, you're probably not going to get the place. So you need to be thoughtful and do nothing to jeopardize the A star, but yeah, within that parameter, do everything you can.
Brilliant.
I should also say, by the way, sorry, Katrina, you know, my comment about it doesn't matter if you worked at Christie's or Sotheby's or whatever. Well, what I meant by that, I think I made it clear, but I'll just reiterate it, was I'm not saying you should turn down an opportunity if it comes your way. I'm just saying, you know, we don't expect it. If you have had an opportunity like that, we'd expect you to make quite a lot of it.
Yeah, definitely. Is there any advice you would give for the required written work candidates need to submit for their application? Should we come to you first, Cam, and then to Frank again?
So I can talk more generally about written work. It depends a little bit subject by subject, but the key thing is we're looking at your ability to formulate discussions in a written format. Is your writing skills that we're trying to assess. But also, one of the things I always encourage applicants to think about when they're submitted written work is kind of like the sort of post-mortem of a feedback that you've received from schools. How have you taken back the feedback that your teacher's given you about submitted written work and actually improved your essay? And it's sort of what we're trying to pick out there is the learning experience you're taking away, how you're processing information, how you're reacting to feedback that's given to you, and how you're progressing through your studies through that. So there's a broad range of things we're looking for when we're looking at written work. But those are the sorts of key things that, generally speaking, we should try and pick out from works that's submitted. But I don't know if there's anything in particular for history of art that you could add to that, Frank.
Well, that holds good for history of art as well, Cam, certainly. Again, you know, students who might be doing the subject at school will usually submit an essay that's related to that. And if that's the case, you might well get a bit more discussion of that because it's an art historical thing. But the fundamental point about the written work, as you say, Cam, is to check that in an essay-based subject where you're not just writing, like in some courses you might just do like 2 pieces of written work a semester or something, but here you're doing, as Hannah well knows, 1 a week, or now Hannah's probably doing 3 over every 2-week period. You know, we need to know you can write and argue and it can hit the ground running in that regard. But you know, in an interview, you're not going to be spending a lot of time, say if somebody's done a handed essay on the Shakespeare play they're doing in English, or on the rise of Nazi youth or something in history. Interesting that may be, I'm probably going to use that just to check that they can argue and write, and we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about that.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. There's two more questions, so I'm going to try and get through them before we run out of time. So Cam, quickly, does it matter, or kind of what's the difference if someone's doing 4 A levels? Does this help or hinder their application?
So this question gets asked a lot about, does my application stand a better chance if I'm doing 4 A levels over 3? I just want to make it very clear that the university entry requirement stipulates 3 A levels, not 4. So if you are doing 3 A levels, you meet the entry requirements, provided you get the A star and 2 A's. But if you have an opportunity to study 4 A levels at school, I encourage students to think about that, mainly because it gives you a good opportunity to put yourself through a more academically vigorous exercise, and all that's going to do is prepare you better for university life, where your workload's only going to go up. Now, in terms of offers, every college has their own policy on how they place their offers for students. Downing, we have a policy that we try and stick to the university standard entry requirements. So even if you are studying 4 A levels, your offer will be based on you achieving an A star and 2 A's in 3 of your A levels. And we will most likely be stipulating that the A star is in a subject which is an essay-based subject. So those are the key requirements that we have. But if you are doing 4 A levels, great, and I would definitely encourage you to do that.
Yeah, I'll agree with that, Katrina. Just don't compromise your 1 A star.
Yes.
You get 4 A's. That you're not going to get in with 4 A's. But in our subject as well, if you're doing art and design, one of the art combinations, for some students that will be an add-on, as it were, to 3 academic subjects. But it depends on the individual student. We take everything on a case-by-case basis.
Brilliant, thank you. The last question we've got time for is for Hannah. So they want to know if you've seen any sort of recent art exhibitions, and kind of which would be your favourite one. I'm aware of COVID, so do you have any sort of art exhibitions that you've seen maybe online, or one that you saw a while ago that you enjoyed?
So I'll mention 2 quickly. There was one recently online of the Warburg Institute. It was in our approaches courses. We were discussing Warburg and his approach to art history, and they've just recently put an entire exhibition online of all of his collections of images that he's put together and his discussions of them, which was just so interesting to see how his mind worked and the connections he drew. So I definitely recommend that one if you are interested at all. And then the last one of the biggest ones for me goes back to my specific interest in Dutch 17th century art. I was lucky enough to go to Amsterdam and go to the Rijksmuseum at the time they were having a massive Rembrandt exhibition. And it's one thing to see his work on a screen in a 2-dimensional way, but to see the texture and the application of paint and the way that he renders shadows and light in that way is just an entirely different experience. So it shows that it's 2 things to see something in person and see it online as well.
Brilliant, thank you. That's all we've got time for, so I'm sorry if we didn't get to your question. Please do email me if we haven't answered your question, and I'll make sure we get back to you with an answer. But thank you very much to Cam, to Hannah and to Frank for their time this afternoon and for their talks. If I could just ask each of you to give a sort of final piece of advice for the students if they're still a bit unsure about applying, and then if we could go in the order that we've presented. So we'll start with you, Cam.
My advice always to students is really research the subject that you want to do at higher education. You're going to spend 3 years studying that subject. Make sure you're making the right choice. By attending this webinar, you're making those sort of informed decisions. So do continue your research into your subject area.
Yep, my advice, well, I think I'd probably say keep your eyes open and start building up your record of works of art you're interested in. Postcards, images in folders on your laptop, drawings if you can draw, whatever, because obviously when you draw things, you look at them almost more closely than just looking at them. So start building up your bank of images, and reading as well. I mean, many students who apply to Cambridge have read the old dependables like E.H. Gombrich's Story of Art, or John Berger's sort of Marxist reappraisal of 1972 Ways of Seeing, but 1972, Cam, you were a very young man then, I expect.
Well, we were quite born then.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Very, very young. And so I think students should look at something more recent as well. And there are good books out there. And I'd probably recommend something like Michael Hatt and Charlotte Klonk's book, Art History: A Critical Introduction to Its Methods. These are readers that are made for people around year 12, year 13, first year undergraduates. And it's not unreasonable to expect that you can pick up a secondhand copy on Amazon for $2.99 or something, or get somebody to give it to you for Christmas.
My piece of advice would be definitely just be yourself, follow your interests. Your application is very much your own, and the discussions are kind of based on that. There's no given set of images that you should like and be interested in. Definitely tailor it to what you're really interested in and what you want to talk about.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all so much for joining today's webinar. When you exit the webinar, it's going to redirect you to a feedback form. Please fill this out and let us know how you found the webinar. But otherwise, have a brilliant rest of your evening. Thanks, everyone. Bye.